Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to AGRION's Disrupt 100 Plus. I must say I love the title and we will do our best to be disruptive. However, given the ground, I think it has to be in a civilized manner. My name is Rahul Gupta. I'm a principal with PwC and I operate in this wonderful intersection of thinking and getting it done, also known as operational strategy. I work with smart cities, sustainability, clean technologies, doing projects on the ground. I'm thrilled to be a moderator for this morning as we have 5 innovators to discuss the future of urban resiliency and dynamic resiliency. We could not have a better setting than the great city of New York to discuss the application of these concepts. As we all know, New York has had its share of black swans, as well as predictable events with very unexpected consequences. Given the title, Urban Resiliency, I just wanted to give you a little sense for the term urban, as well as the issues surrounding resiliency. Urbanization is real, and we must address it from a variety of perspectives for the fallout, if not addressed properly, it can be catastrophic. Today, there are about 30 cities with a population of 10 million or more, and this is growing. There are about 470 cities with a population of 1 million, and by 2025, UN estimates there will be 550 cities with a population of 1 million or more. In the late 1800s, only one city, around 1890, had one city had a population of 1 million, that was London. Recent estimates by the World Bank show that 3.3 billion people live in cities, and 60 million people are moving out of the rural setting into cities. That's about 164,000 people a day. So urban reality is here, and we must address the issues associated with it. Similarly, disasters are real, and we must address them from a variety of perspectives as well. And if we are going to have smart cities, they must address some of those issues. Between 1992 and today, the cost of hurricanes in the U.S. exceeds a third of $1 trillion. That is not a small amount. The most recent event that New Yorkers and those living on the East Coast remember well is Sandy, which caused about 300 fatalities and about $70 billion of damage. In March of 2011, the Tohoku earthquake, which led to the Fukushima disaster, caused the movement of about 500,000 people in a 20-kilometer zone. That is huge in terms of the impact on the population. Katrina caused 3,000 deaths and around $200 billion in economic damage. We can go on and on with the Deepwater Horizon on the Aceh and other earthquakes. So when you have urbanization and disaster, they come together. It's an explosive mix, whether they are of human origin or whether they have to do with natural events. Most importantly, the effects are felt on housing, infrastructure, property, healthcare, air quality, traffic, supply chain, logistics. In short, everything that we consider normal is disrupted. And when we talk about resiliency, it is really about getting back to normal. Humans like order and like normal. We will pay for excitement and thrills, but we want to get back to our normal lives. So, the path to recovery and reconstitution is varied within the cities, and how we get there is no simple recipe. But some concepts are applicable. So discuss these themes and kick off. Let me briefly introduce the panel. We'll address some topics, and then we'll open up for questions. So let me just say, I'm going to start with Gary Leatherman with Booz Hamilton has more than 27 years of proven experience in energy technology markets. His career is focused on technology and business strategy around the nexus of energy, environment, and regulatory policy. And Gary and I had the privilege of working on a report for the U.S. Navy on how to make the U.S. Navy more sufficient, resilient, and also sustainable. Let me introduce to you Mr. Pospisil. Did I say it right? Mr. Pospisil David is a sales and marketing professional in the field of critical energy, infrastructure, and energy his current position as manager of commercial and industrial energy efficiency programs, he oversees a $300 million program portfolio supported by a number of over 700 market professionals. Cara Olmsted. Cara is also with ConEdison Solutions. She's been there since its inception and was part of the 4-person team that developed the business plan that led to its launch in 1997. She has held various positions at CES and currently Director of Marketing and New Business Development for the commodity lines. David Gilford. David Gilford is Vice President of the New York City Economic Development Corporation, and you heard that mentioned a little bit earlier. The city's primary vehicle for promoting economic growth. As a director of the Center of Economics Transformation, David oversees New York City's economic development initiatives for clean technology, energy, and resiliency and innovation. He's had prior positions with GE, McKinsey, and the Federal Reserve. And finally, David LaBua. David LaBua is a leader in sustainable urban mobility, author, systems analyst, and founder and CEO of VoicePark, the world's first mobile application guiding drivers by voice to the closest parking spot. And I think New Yorkers probably will love what he has to say about that. So, let me launch directly into addressing some of the conversations we just heard from our prior panelists. Can we just go one round and discuss what problem is dynamic resiliency trying to solve? Gary, would you?
I think the problem we're trying to solve is how do you keep not just businesses and people, civilization running in the face of these disasters. We have urban dense packed population and do it in a way that not just as a static response, but as it evolves, as the crisis moves forward, and it helps you prepare for the next crisis. So that's what I believe is trying to solve.
I think that one of the primary issues is that the goal keeps changing. I mean, no one ever thought that there would be a storm surge in New York City of 14 feet. So now there has been. So if we're going to fortify and build resiliency into city infrastructure, we're building to what? 18 feet, 20 feet? I mean, that whole, the concept that we had a good idea of what the max was, it's kind of, Sandy kind of blew that away. So I think that the dynamic piece of this is so what's the target? What are we protecting against? And, if we overshoot, we're going to spend billions too much. So, taxpayers and ratepayers don't want us to do that. So finding a middle ground, I think, is very difficult.
I think that's very true. During the tsunami that led to Fukushima, they had built a wall. That was their expectation of the maximum they could achieve. However, the wave was over 50 feet high, so nobody really anticipated what the change would be. Carrie?
No, that's interesting. That the point is that most of the design work that we do is like a 100-year event. And how much resources are we going to put into that 100-year event, not knowing when that event might happen? And I think the question that becomes is how do I build it within my infrastructure on an ongoing basis? So that, to today's point, you're achieving it at different levels so that, in essence, you baseload
this from helping people find a parking spot in under 30 seconds is the incentive collectively, environmentally, it has an enormous impact.
Thank you. David, transportation is the lifeblood of cities and really our economic system. Getting products and services in time, in front of the consumers is how we succeed and compete with the rest of the world. What are some of the issues that you're dealing with? Because without a synchronized system, we waste energy and time, estimating billions of dollars and billions of hours. Can you discuss some of your ideas, how we improve supply chain logistics, get to smarter cities?
Yeah, transportation is the lifeblood and the arterial system of economics, and there's an enormous amount of waste that goes on. So there's 38 billion tons of excess CO2 produced every year. 10% of that, 30% of that, 10 billion tons is from transportation. 1/3 of all vehicles in downtown municipalities is not imposed on people looking for getting somewhere, but they're actually looking for parking. Columbia University did a recent study that showed that 40% of all energy consumed by vehicles is people looking for a parking spot in metropolitan areas. In San Francisco, where really built out a lot of the numbers, and in 1 year, 800 million miles were driven simply looking for a parking spot, and that one really blew my mind. So what we've done is we've come up with a system of smart vehicle detection sensors that detect whether or not a spot is occupied, and that communicates that information to the grid. And that smart parking grid shows this is a snapshot of a real-time appointment. It shows exactly everything that's going on in real time. So for the user of their smartphone or connected car, looking for a spot, if they put in the address of where they want to go, it'll take them to the address. 3 blocks before, it will also start looking for parking. So from the user perspective, that's the incentive. I can find a parking spot in 30 seconds as opposed to 6.5 minutes, or in New York, 21 minutes. From the municipality's perspective, they know everything that's happening. This has never been able to be known before. It was all just sort of estimation. So the environmental impact on this is that in a city like San Francisco, you take 500,000 parking instances, reduce them by 6 minutes. You have 3 million minutes that drivers are not on the roads and vehicles are not clogging up the pathways each day. So, as far as the supply chain and logistics goes, to clear out that congestion just allows everything to run so much more smoothly. And in a situation like using this foundation for disasters and other things, one thing that we really promote is to open up our APIs so that other people with other ideas and other innovations can build upon our foundation and do their thing and use their creativity to create applications and a myriad of other uses.
Thank you, David. I think this is a great example of where technology, the user experience, and real value in terms of savings in both of fuel and time make a difference. And cities are really lifeblood. People want to move to cities because that's where the economic opportunities are. And cities are competing for talent. And having this kind of capability really makes a differentiation. David Gilford, question for you. New York has taken the brunt of several natural human-generated disasters. And New York City keeps bouncing back, and I was surprised. However, I think New Yorkers might be on to the game that something has changed with climate change, with what we experience with Sandy, and maybe climate change is real, and how do we address those issues? Can you discuss some of the activities you're leading and those that will provide a different experience for New Yorkers moving forward? How do you learn from the lessons and actually apply them and make it a better user experience for New Yorkers?
I think it's certainly true that New York has experienced more than our fair share of disasters, both natural and man-made. And I think that has given New Yorkers, anyone who's lived through Sandy, for example, it makes things more concrete than the abstract of there's a long-term looming threat of climate change, but how does that affect me? My hope is that is translating into action. I've seen that in some of the things that the the city has done. But I think for the title of this panel, I think it's the link between smart cities and resilient cities, I think is important. The other term that I would like to add into this is sustainable. Because in 2007, when the city of New York developed a long-term vision of Plan NYC for what the city is going to look like in 2030, a big portion of that was figuring out what are the threats that we're going to be facing with 1 million more people, rising sea levels, and so forth. What investments do we as a city need to do to create a vibrant, economically competitive, high-quality city in 2030? I think what Sandy did is it made it very clear that you can't have a sustainable city without it also being resilient. But what I hope is not lost is that you also should not be focused only on resilience, because investments to strengthen the grid can be very supportive of sustainability, but they could also be counterproductive. You can imagine if everyone added their own diesel-powered generator. There's things like that from an individual action perspective might seem rational, but then when you multiply it with thousands of generators around the city, all needing to be tested and spewing down the fields, it really can be counterproductive to a bigger what does it take to have a sustainable city with a high quality of life. Last year, the city of New York released a report called Stronger, More Resilient New York, which was a response to Sandy as well as incorporating resiliency into our long-term planning. And that had literally hundreds of different recommendations and about $20 billion in projects. It was clear that first finding $20 billion is no easy task in the current environment. It also is going to require private sector investment. And the technologies that we have now are important, but things will keep evolving. So I think a key role that we can play is to help identify some of the technologies coming down the road. And that's why we did the Brooklyn Urban Terminal Smart Grid project with energy storage, working with ConEd, of course, as well as the U.S. Department of Energy, and are now sharing that information through the grid market AGRION platform. Because it's easy to do a one-off project, relatively to do a one-off project, but if we're going to move the needle and make the whole city stronger, we need to have replicable solutions that can leverage things like the green bond funding, for example. There needs to be business models behind this that can bring in private capital. We're talking about 1 million buildings in New York City. Individual action can do a lot, but it's really need to have both the tools and the capital to get that done.
Thank you. It's fascinating that the city of New York did embrace some of those recommendations, and as we heard earlier, put actually a business plan in place and is providing access to capital. I think that's wonderful, and which kind of leads me to the next topic for you, Cara. City services are key to happy citizens, and New York City keeps providing, and you're actually dealing with a mega city. Clean water, clean power, 24/7. But cities overall are experiencing stress because more and more people are moving in and the demand for affordable services is going up. How are you addressing this intersection of consumer needs and consumer demands while dealing with an infrastructure that requires significant upgrades, significant updates, so that you don't fall into this trap that other cities are falling into?
Well, I think one of the components is that we, as people, are resilient. And some of the responsibility falls to you and me, and owners and consumers in the marketplace, building owners. And we as citizens are responsible also for maintaining the integrity of our infrastructure and the tax system. Now, I primarily work in the energy industry, and that transfer of the risk of the integrity of the energy industry has been migrating a little bit since the start of deregulation in 1997. And over that time, there have been other legislative changes that have moved the risk from the governmental entity onto, say, the end user or the end consumer. What that's opened up is things that are opportunities as well as advancements in technology. So let me give you a couple of examples. In 1997, energy deregulated. You had the opportunity, previously you bought your energy from my friend Dave here. Regulated rates, one size fits all, basically. You had deregulation, and now you had an option to buy fixed, buy variable pricing structures. You had the ability to modify your equipment to adjust how that price might be. had new technology advancements come in. And what happened at that time, you had reduced energy costs where you could create different portfolio structures that gave you budget certainty. In 2004, we had renewable portfolio standards, which increased everybody's supply costs. But at the same time, you had solar advancements in efficiency. And I've worked on a number of different solar teams for the company over the years to develop when the market was right for that opportunity. Well, what happened with solar advancements? Well, now you have incentives associated with installing solar, and you have PPA prices that are lower than your grid prices. So here you go, you have your opportunity now. Then in 2012, you had all the FERC orders revolving around demand response. That then said to you, Mr. Customer, you can get involved in preserving the integrity of the grid in times of high prices or in times of stress. So you now become part of the solution, you're part of the solution. And you can have the option to take advantage of it. So what came about with that? You have now auto DR. You have a view or a lot of different automation tools that allow you to see into your equipment, how your equipment is performing, and how you control it to reduce your costs over time or take advantage of different economic opportunities in the marketplace. Now you have 2014, what an exciting year this has been. You have plant closings in the Midwest. You have a whole vortex in January. So what happens? Your natural gas supplies coming into New England gets diverted into the Midwest. You have prices for electricity that are $1,600 a megawatt, which ordinarily they're like $40. Here again, here's the opportunity for the customer to say, what can I do within my systems? How do I create an infrastructure that's flexible and gives me optionality in the time of crisis or in the time of high prices? And what we've seen customers doing is they have multiple fuel sources. Some of them have, next to ConEd, you have steam, you have natural gas, you have oil, or you have electricity. Some of them are dual fuel, multiple fuel. Lots of people have backup generation, cogeneration. There are also, there's a little less solar in New York City, but there's some of it around. What's also happening is you have the sophistication of EMS systems that give you that view into how your equipment is operating, so that you can really control load in the event of, say, not only an issue on the grid, but say that happened this January, but when you have a serious issue, how is your equipment performing or not performing, and what can you control to reduce your cost and your draw on the system? So I think a lot of it, like I said, comes back to us. We have the ability to do things. We have the ability to implement and effectually change as people. And I think that we are a key component to the solution.
I think that's very true. There's a sense of individual responsibility, but that goes with changing behavior, putting in some training, and creating incentives. David, to you, Cara mentioned the consumer side. We all are operating with 3 or 4 or 5 devices, and even though they're more efficient, the number of devices keep proliferating, and everything is interconnected. So our consumer sits on top of this hierarchy, but you need an infrastructure to actually make it work. You need an infrastructure that's up to date. You need an infrastructure that is responsive and resilient. Not necessarily redundant, but certainly resilient. And redundancy sometimes comes into play. Can you speak to what New York City has done to modernize its infrastructure? What are the lessons learned that could be implemented in other cities? Because certainly as a mega city, you have to be at the forefront. As we heard earlier, Edison has really embraced sustainability.
Right. Well, it's interesting because as a company, ConEdison is really doing work on, I guess in industry parlance, we would say, on either side of the meter. So even before Sandy, there was work that was funded by the federal government to start some smart grid pilots and to find out, what works, what's beneficial, what's a good investment, maybe what is not. And so those have been implemented and there are more in place. But one of the interesting things in terms of being in a place and time is post-Sandy, obviously there's a need to do certain things to the electrical distribution system that weren't anticipated. So those are underway. ConEdison has a plan to spend $1 billion to fortify and waterproof various things, but there's also, at the same time, we're being engaged in the REV proceeding, which is really rethinking the utility business, and it really, there's a play on either side of the meter. So the company is working on, so what does a distributed energy resource look like? Which are beneficial? How do we decide where those are sited? And then there's also the question, because the REV proceeding really, the intention is, or the thought is that the utility would interact very directly with customers and customer assets and have some degree of control over them, which is not a real pleasing thought to a lot of customers. But there is a way that can be done, and it's mutually beneficial to the customer site as well as to the system. So I mean, my team works on the customer side. So we administer incentive programs that help customers to make investments to improve their usage, their efficiency. But we're also at a point now where we're trying to enable those customers to put in systems that will have them ready to interact with the grid when that becomes a reality. And I mean, it also plays into, Nick earlier talked about the potential retirement of Indian Point, and we just came out with a program in partnership with NYCERDC with $220 million worth of funding to be given out in the next 24 months to reduce the peak demand by 100 megawatts. So, as most of us know, that last 100 megawatts on a peak day is the most expensive, the dirtiest, and if we can keep that off, I mean, that's going to help. So there's a lot of activity, and this REV proceeding is really going to kind of bring all these things together, and we're going to figure out how to make it work.
Thank you, David. We talked about an application, the programs, the consumer, the infrastructure, and Gary. What are some of the complex systems that have addressed sustainability and resilience, and what lessons can we draw? You and I have had the opportunities to work together. What are some of the entities out there that have put it together and that we can use as a model? Are there any things there, and can you discuss this?
Yeah, I'd say there's a number of answers to that question because there's different dimensions to the problem, and I'm going to vary a bit wide field here, but bear with me. You think about resiliency of a city, whether you think of it in Maslow's hierarchy, where you need food, shelter, energy, those things. And so how you address each of those things depends on the nature of the disaster, the intensity of it, and that sort of stuff. And so, example, the first food, I think something that this group of people have done unbelievably well is the Mormon Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormon Church. As an organization, their members almost all have about a year's worth of MREs. Stockpile, give them the resiliency of their community. And so there's a system that they are actually out there actively doing something. And it provides resilience to the community. It's a close-knit community. They can share in case of disaster, and it enables them to have resilience. Second example is more on the energy side. I can't really, in Sandy, there was a couple cases where there were microgrids that were actually in operation, and they were actually, with solar panels, they were actually able to keep running. Because they actually had to put microgrids in, which again, I think is a key point that you can do this. Now, this brings up an issue that I think in the stressful period of a natural disaster, in terms of equality, because, there's the haves and have-nots. People, certain groups, certain people can afford microgrids, can afford diesel generators. Other people can't or won't. And so, depending on the length of the duration of the crisis, these are issues I think the society we're going to have to face. I mean, and I do think that technology can help us there, because as storage goes down, it's going to be very easy to at least almost everybody, I think, at some point have some storage in their home or apartment, at least to get through small amounts of crises. So I think there's some technology can help us, but there's also a big social. And I will leave with one last one where it worked. Did not work at all. And this is it's ancient history to many people here, but World War II, the siege of Leningrad. Talk about an urban disaster. And this was a case where basically, if you want to look at an example of what not to do to plan resiliency, read the history of the siege of Leningrad. I mean, from not evacuating of the population, when they had a chance to not moving in supplies, not moving in resiliency, redundancy, it is a classic of what not to do. So with that, I will stop.
So, thank you. Before we open up for the audience, a couple more questions for the panel. And wanted to discuss the intersection between sustainability and resilience in smart cities. Resilience implies that you have a way to recover, reconstitute quickly, and power is a key component. Can the panel discuss how we deal with that issue? Because our current utility model, utility 1.0, is really built around non-renewables. David, you want to first?
Well, I think we see the change.
I knew this question would jump. Yeah, jumping on.
No, well, I think we see the change underway already, right? And many people still don't realize that ConEdison does not generate most of the power that is consumed in New York City. So, I mean, that was a major change when the market was deregulated. But as renewables have come online and distributed generation has had greater penetration, that whole distribution, I mean, the generation in many cases is moving closer to the customer, as opposed to being at some huge district plant, and there's losses over miles of wires and cables and things like that. So in a city as dense as New York, it's difficult to see that central stations would be eliminated completely. But in terms of resiliency and sustainability, being able to, one, reduce load. So one of the things that we're doing in our new program is trying to encourage people, especially for cooling, because the cooling air conditioning really thrives. They peak during the summer when we max out, and to drive them to innovative solutions, whether it's ice storage, so they make ice at night with an electric chiller, and then burn it during the day rather than running that chiller, or whether it's alternate fuels like steam-driven chillers or gas-driven chillers and things like that. So there's really a balance. I think when you look at it, the customer-sided usage reduction or control over that is much less expensive than building the generation. But certainly, regardless of how much we reduce, there's always going to be a need for generation, right? So moving some of that, making it non-polluting, renewable type assets is really something that's underway. And again, the REV really has a vision that this is all going to be a cohesive, almost like a ISO, but at the distribution level, where the utility kind of controls these assets and dispatches them. So that's a revolutionary thought. It should be very interesting how it turns out.
Gary?
I would disagree a little bit with you, not violently, but I think there's actually, in some ways, almost a fundamental tension at times between sustainability and resiliency. Because if you think of it, we mentioned we can all put diesel generators in our homes or factories. Well, diesel generators are not very sustainable. One of the most resilient of all power plants are coal-fired power plants. They actually generate a month of coal sitting in the coal pile right there. So they're ready to go. So that doesn't mean that resiliency can't be sustainable, but it takes an active, deliberate plan to do that, and education and the right policies in place to make sure that, again, as individual actors do what's right for them, it does not actually negatively impact the overall sustainability.
Build on that, so I think technology certainly is key, and there's some trends that are supported. Policy is definitely plays a big role because it helps shape how technology gets adopted. But I think that also the innovations in business models and financing is really key here, because no one really wants to own their own power plant. But what they want to have is they want to have power that they can depend on. So the extension of things like PPAs and leases to technologies that can help people produce, say, a portion of their power. I think it will be powerful, because resiliency doesn't require that everything continues as normal after a disaster. Because there's a huge difference between having no power and a little bit of power. So I'm just imagining a home on Long Island that's got solar. Solar maybe produces, say, 10% of their they couldn't do anything with the solar panels because the grid was down, the inverter disconnected from the grid to make sure that the workers were not electrocuted, right? So that's important stuff. But the technology exists so that there would be, someone could plug in their cell phone and plug in, medical devices and so forth right into the inverter and still be able to have power for for a good portion of the day. And I think those types of incremental improvements, it doesn't solve all our problems, but it's an order of magnitude better than having systems where one thing goes down and you have nothing.
Please.
One thing I'd like to say is it's not so much about waiting for the point of recovery where we have to make something happen. One thing I've seen in the tech world is that these events that are happening, that bringing in different companies, creates this organic but strategic solutions to so many things. I was at an event sponsored by the Green Parking Council and something called a hackathon sponsored by American Airlines and MasterCard World people. And in those events, you have such a level of creativity of people to integrate strategically but organically that is taking things to a level of solving problems before they actually happen. And one just example of that is we did a green garage, so there were 4 or 5 companies with their technologies just to see what would happen. And we came up with a solution for a phenomenon called being iced out. So when you have an electric vehicle that you have 10 miles left, you need some juice. What's available now is to guide you to a charging station that shows that nobody's charging. And it won't tell you if there's a suburban diesel car parked there. So what we came up with is putting one of our sensors, integrating them with the charging stations. So now rather than being 70% accurate, it's 100% accurate of whether or not that station is being available. And then from the support of the capital investors, what they're looking for is standardization, scalability, and ready for deployment. So by us integrating and actually coming up with something that is scalable and is standardized, that's kind of what they need to feel secure in investing in it. And just one organic thing that happened in a municipality that we weren't, I predicted, but didn't know, and that putting a sensor system in to help drivers find spaces more quickly. I knew that would work, but what I didn't know would work so well was the enforcement officers also, instead of circling looking for the nearest violation, they were pinpointed. So this one municipality's enforcement efficiency went up 800% in the first month. And so it was able to sustain itself financially.
Thank you. As the panel was speaking, I was looking back at the large banner, and it's interesting that we're talking about resilience, which is getting normal, but I think it's a new normal because we're trying to disrupt the old business model and trying with something new. We have about 10 minutes left, so I'd like to open up to the audience to ask questions. We've covered a very wide swath. We probably spent all day discussing various themes, so I think there's some microphones going around. Question right here. And if you ask a question of David, you have a 60% chance of getting the right person.
Actually, this is a question for VoicePark. Do you have installations in cities already, and how are the governments of the cities, how are you interfacing with them?
What was that? How are they going to?
I would assume that you would need the support of the city in order to put your sensors in.
You know, we have 40,000 sensors with the manufacturer that we partner with installed globally. And there are cities, a lot of it depends on the size of the city, the bureaucracy of the city, and other motivations. If it's a city that's looking to generate more revenue, excellent. It works very, very well. A city that isn't so much about enforcement, wants to reduce congestion, it works very well too, but they don't know where the revenue is going to come from. So that's where we have to align with larger partners that will fund the deployment of that, which will eventually sustain itself. So we're starting a deployment in London, and it's all going very well. And we're testing out RFID there, so that you can create less friction in the market experience and create more room for fluidity. The vehicle will park, the sensor will pick up the easy paths or whatever transponder you have, and just immediately start the dumping from there. So you just are guided pays and everything streamlined.
Question right in front.
Good morning. Thank you so much for an informative discussion, and I do appreciate some of the diverse opinions that were expressed this morning. I'm an accidental engineer in the RFID tracking and micrologistics space, and one of the things that the trained engineers introduced us to was this concept of Monte-Carlo simulation theory, which really explores opportunities for disruption. What kinds of models to simulate and anticipate the kinds of disruptions that we need to build resiliency for? What kinds of models are being used, if anyone has a comment, please?
Absolutely. Very.
Well, we we find it actually one of our most powerful ways that it's not necessarily a model. We actually use board gaming quite a bit in my firm. In fact, we just participated in board game with the Washington, D.C. Council of Metropolitan Governments to look around energy resiliency in case of an energy crisis. So board gaming, we find is very, very, very powerful tool. But we also use, there's a number of discrete event simulation models that we use to build simulations as well. And sometimes we use it as a standalone, sometimes we use it to actually drive the board game.
I would also add that there's a supply chain logistics model into which you can interject perturbation, such as our supply chain is just-in-time supply chain. Most of Western European economies focus on minimizing inventories and minimizing cost. But that makes for a very brittle supply chain logistics. So if you have floods, you have tornadoes, you have other events that disrupt manufacturing parts that are assembled as value chain. So you can use the supply chain model and understand where resilience is going to fail, or there won't be any resilience. So there are other ways of doing it, but I will echo what Gary said. I think we had a question back there.
Good morning, Giselle. Just in the concept and the topic of resiliency, what strikes me is that you have two really key factors. How do you minimize the reasons why you're going to have a problem, and how do you respond during the problem? And when I look at right now, what's happening with CHP and the ability to get great money from NYCERDC and ConEd, to put in CHP systems that can be oversized, to be able to provide an additional benefit, say during an outage or when the grid is approaching critical times for demand response. That seems to be a very concrete example of an approach to address resiliency, but also stay within the boundaries of our intention around sustainability. And I can see that, I guess, also happening with battery storage over time, especially if ConEd is going to be willing to release space from commercial real estate owners to put batteries in buildings. But I wanted to just bring it back to this concept of CHP oversizing to be able to provide additional benefit. And primarily, I go to the example of the hotel in Manhattan, the Brevoort, who really, I think the occupancy there was only for 720 people, but they were able to support 1,500 during Sandy. When we look back at Sandy, are we using it as a model to apply potential technologies and see what would have happened had we had these things in place? Anything like that going on?
Sure, David.
One of the things the city's doing with some of the federal recovery money is a program that we're calling Horizon NYC, which is looking for the best technologies from around the world that could be piloted on particularly small businesses that were either directly impacted by Sandy or are now at risk because they're in the new 100-year floodplain. One of the key criteria that we're using as we're evaluating proposals is what would have happened during Sandy, and there's a couple of reasons for that. We're definitely not planning to, we do know that the next disaster is not going to be exactly like Sandy, but there's this tension because when after a disaster happens, the funding that comes in usually is tied to what happened previously. I think that this, because Sandy is a sort of a widespread enough event, and that is tied to expectations of future flooding and climate change-driven extreme weather, it gives us the opportunity to look at if hypothetically, if window technology had been installed, would it have made a difference? What would it have done in terms of allowing people to get back to work faster, to minimize the losses of inventory or things like that, and be able to quantify some of the benefits of these technologies? Because unlike sustainability or energy efficiency, it's hard to say the net present value of this resiliency investment is X dollars, because we don't know when the next disaster will happen and exactly the severity of it.
Well, thank you very much. I think I'm being given the book. Thank you to the audience. Thank you to my colleagues. We've covered a fairly broad topic of resiliency. At the end of the day, as you continue discussing today and tomorrow, just keep in mind that resiliency is really about recovering and reconstituting, doing it in such a way that you can understand the lessons learned and turn them into lessons implemented, so as you go forward, you're better prepared. Thank you very much.